here I am standing in my aged Tuscan villa, or perhaps my old Parisian flat. If you're thinking that, you're wrong. This is fake Limewash. I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. I want to talk to you about why I completely pivoted from my intention of painting my entire downstairs of my house with Limewash paint, and why I like this technique way better for a lot of reasons.
Okay, so first of all, what exactly is Limewash? Limewash is a natural paint made from lime, water, and sometimes a pigment to create this really natural, mottled, kind of plaster look on interior walls. People like it for a reason. I'm gonna walk you through the process of how I started Limewash in my kitchen. So first of all, you've got to prime your surface with an acrylic-based primer. This is important for the Limewash to stick to the wall properly. When I went to the hardware store, I actually had kind of a hard time finding acrylic-based primer as opposed to latex or water-based, but I finally did find one that worked, and any hardware store should have it. You might just have to ask someone working there. Now, priming takes forever, so let's just skip right ahead to the actual Limewash painting process. You're gonna need one of these big masonry brushes, as well as, of course, your Limewash paint, and this is one that I got just from my local hardware store, rather than one of the really fancy colors you can get from companies overseas, which take a lot of time and money to get to. This costs about $52, I think 52 or 53, which wasn't too bad for the amount that they give you. It definitely stretches pretty far. But what you're gonna have to do first is mix this with water. So the Limewash that you get from the hardware store that's made for bricks and stone is not ready to just go right on your walls. It does have to be diluted first. So I am by no means an expert on Limewash paint. I also didn't end up being the biggest fan of Limewash, as you know from watching this video, or you will at least know in detail by the time you get to the end. So that being said, I'm not going to give a full in-depth tutorial on how to use Limewash paint. There are a lot of videos like that out there. I'll just give you a little bit about my experience. So I mixed the Limewash to be about pancake batter consistency, and I started putting it on the wall with my big masonry brush. Now, I did get the cheapest masonry brush available. It was about $15. The other ones being, $30 to $50. I am definitely in a position where I'm trying to save every penny that I can, so I got this cheaper one, and honestly, I got what I paid for. It was not the highest quality, definitely didn't do as smooth or as finished a job as I think a nicer brush would do, so that is one thing I would recommend splurging on if you are serious about trying Limewash paint. Now, this whole cloud painting technique essentially just means that you don't want to paint the wall in a systematic top to bottom, side to side fashion. Instead, you want to paint these organic cloud shapes that you blend the edges together as you go until the entire wall is filled up. Now, as far as painting a wall goes, I did find this technique to be pretty meditative and a little bit more mindful and enjoyable than just using a paint roller. So that was pretty fun, and I did end up using the same kind of brush technique with my faux Limewash, which I'll talk to you about in another minute. But here you can see me just pushing that paint as far as it can naturally go before I reload my brush and start another cloud pattern. Now, not gonna lie, this is a very time-consuming process. Obviously, using a roller to paint a wall will go a lot quicker than using a 6-inch brush with your hand. So just keep that in mind when you embark on a project like this. If you've got a lot of walls and you have a big space to cover, it is going to take some time, especially with me doing this in my kitchen. I had so many little nooks and crannies in this space that it did take a lot of time to finish. Was it worth it? Maybe not for the Limewash paint. I definitely think it's worth it for the faux technique that I'm going to talk to you about just in another couple minutes here. But we'll let this part finish up so you can see how the paint looks as it dries. It definitely dries lighter than it goes on, so this was kind of alarming to see how dark it was, but I did hear that it gets lighter as it dries, and you can see that in this little time lapse. So here's how it looked on my wall after one coat. The Limewash technique does require 2 coats at least to cover the whole surface. You can see a little bit of white primed wall peeking through, but it totally has that textured, subtle lime or plaster look to it, which was, successful. I don't totally hate the Limewash paint. I definitely like how it looks.
So as you can see, it has this mottled visual texture. It doesn't have any physical texture to it really, aside from the fact that it is a little bit powdery. So I'm just going to take my finger and rub it on the wall, but it has left a powder residue on my finger. So the thing about Limewash paint is that it is not permanent in any way, shape, or form. If I take a wet rag and rub this wall behind me, the Limewash paint will simply wash right off. So that's one major drawback for me, and YouTube did not at all prepare me for that. I found one video that talked about how if you're using it in a space where there's going to be water, you should seal it, but I couldn't find a way to properly seal Limewash paint because if you use a spray sealer, it will leave a weird texture on the wall. It won't coat the wall evenly and it will leave visible texture wherever you've sprayed it. And if you're using like a paint on wall sealer, I was finding that first of all hard to find, and I'm thinking I would have run into a similar problem because as soon as you put water on the wall, it shows that water. You're basically reactivating the Limewash paint.
So here's where I installed some peel and stick tile, which I will be giving a very positive review of in a future video. I haven't caulked over this tile yet, so you can see where I washed away the Limewash paint and it was a little bit above where my tile ended up ending or finishing on the wall, and you can see that it literally is just the primed wall underneath. It was so easy to wipe away with a rag, took absolutely no effort, which was good for me installing this tile, but really bad for my walls. So let me just talk to you a little bit about the paint that you see on the wall behind me. This is my living room. This is where I had intended to do a Limewash paint, and after my experience in my kitchen with the Limewash paint, I actually just completely pivoted into a new direction, which is this faux Limewash look that I kind of just decided to wing it on, and I really like how it turned out. The reasons I like this paint behind me better than Limewash is first and foremost because of its durability. The paint that's on this wall behind me is regular, everyday acrylic latex paint from the hardware store, making it affordable, super accessible, and available in any color that you could possibly want. And I think it also gives you a lot of the same textural looks that Limewash can give you. It also has a similar technique. I basically used the exact same technique, but it was just a little bit more simple and intuitive, rather than like Limewash, which feels a little bit more new and intimidating if you haven't used it before. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through this process of the faux Limewash technique. And essentially what we're going for is to create a texture that is similar to what you get with Limewash paint, which means a texture that is purely visual, doesn't create like raised, areas on the wall. It just looks like it has this mottled kind of vintage look to it. So that's what we're going for with this technique. What I am mixing up here with the 2 different paint cans are 2 slightly different shades of essentially the same color. So if you go to the hardware store and you pick up one of those paint chips that has several shades on one piece of paper, you want to pick 2 colors that are close together. You can pick any colors at all. I went with these 2 really neutral ones, but the nice thing about this technique is that rather than having to go to one of like 2 or 3 companies that make colored paint in the type of paint you need, since you can use everyday hardware store paint, you have the full spectrum of colors available to you, so you can really get creative with your choices. So I chose this really neutral, 2 different shades of this same kind of like neutral earth tone, and I'm gonna pour them into my paint tray simultaneously. So that's why I just took my cans and poured them into 2 separate containers. Since the cans are too heavy for me to pour with, my 2 hands at the same time, I made my size a little bit smaller and more manageable for myself. So I poured them both into the tray at the exact same time, and I'm gonna dip my brush right in the middle of the tray. Since I dipped my larger brush into the middle of the tray, it means I got both colors on my brush at once. And if I use that cloud painting technique, that was what I used with the Limewash, I'm going to get a similar mottled texture on the wall. So rather than creating this through the lime in the paint, it really just uses the two slightly different pigments to create that visual texture. So is this technique still time consuming? Yes, definitely. I mean, you're painting an entire room or an entire wall, whatever your project entails, with just a handheld paintbrush rather than a paint roller, which you would be traditionally using probably to paint a wall. So it does take some time. The nice thing about this technique using the everyday just acrylic hardware store paint is that I think the coverage is a little bit better the first time around. So I did choose pretty light colors, but I didn't have to do a second coat. If I was using darker colors, they might have showed the white primed wall through a little bit more obviously. But one nice thing about this technique is I didn't have to do a second coat, which definitely saved me a lot of time. And once again, the cloud painting technique was really pretty meditative and mindful. I enjoyed the experience even though it was time consuming. And it's fun to see the texture kind of come right before your very eyes. And you can keep standing back, checking your work, seeing if there's an area you want to adjust or change a little bit and customize the wall to your liking. I liked how this turned out so much that I definitely want to try it again in another room with some darker, moodier colors and just get a little bit more bold with the technique and see how it looks, because I do think the texture turned out pretty beautifully. So here's the finished look in my living room. You can ignore the two unpainted areas in the rooms behind. Just focus on this really nice texture on the walls. I think it looks beautiful in the natural light. I think it looks really nice in the evening with just a couple of lamps on. I think it even emphasizes the vintage feel of it, which is exactly what I was going for when I started off with Limewash. So it was just more accessible, more affordable, and way more durable. So I definitely recommend, if you're interested in Limewash, to try out this technique. See if you like it as much as I did. As always, if you're here, thank you so much for watching. I'm genuinely enjoying this process of creating things, documenting my experience, and packaging it up to share with YouTube and with whoever is out there watching. I really enjoy it. So stick around. I've got a lot more planned. I've got a lot of footage ready to organize for my next videos. I think I'm going to be switching to an every other week model instead of an every week model, just because I am not a full-time YouTuber and this is a lot of work. But stick around and there will definitely be more coming.